of the Midcoast Community Council for August 23rd, 2023 to order. By way of preview, I will just mention we are leaving the windows open because of heat. There may be periods in time where there'll be background noise where we will just pause and let the truck or whatever pass, and then we'll continue. All right. So with that,
There's an echo.
it's not my echo.
Is it this one?
It could be. Do you have your speaker muted?
Have it muted. Oh,
Not on this.
My speaker is muted. My audio is off. My video is off. We're
Looks
okay.
like the echo has gone away.
Okay, good. So Scott is absent. So I've asked Claire if she would call the roll.
Okay, you ready to do that?
Yes,
Okay, Greg,
here,
Dan,
Here.
Ann,
She's on Zoom. I see her, but she's muted.
okay. Kimberly,
here.
Scott, no.
Gus,
Gus. He will be here later.
he'll be late. And Claire,
Here,
okay. So we have a quorum and we're expecting an additional attendee to come soon. Let me pull up the agenda here. Apologies for being fumble fingered here. Okay, we'll begin with the Board of Supervisors reports and reports from other government officials. I'm told by Mike O'Neill, he will not be here. I don't know if Gina is joining us, but I do see his esteemed Harvey Rarbach. So Harvey, could you lead us off with a Half Moon Bay update, and we'll see if there's a county person or other person here. Oh, there's Gina. Well, why don't we start with you, Harvey, because I already introduced you as esteemed.
What a joke. Thank you, Greg. I have a few infrastructure reports. As Greg probably knows better than anybody else, the state and the feds are trying to screw with this middle mile broadband initiative. And I think the county is working hard to correct the changes that the state wanted to make to take away the Midcoast from the phase one of the middle mile initiative to have better broadband available. So Greg's really more of an expert on that than I am, but I think it's worth noting that we really have to fight to get broadband on the whole coast side, not just the Midcoast. We had a wonderful community meeting last Thursday about 880 Stone Pine and the effort to build farm worker housing was well attended. From all the reports that I've heard, people really felt like they were listened to, and the comments will be incorporated in any changes that will occur. But that project is really rolling along. The idea is that by the end of next year, there will be these mobile homes for farm workers and other essential workers at 880 Stone Pine. That's good news. We had, I don't know if to call it good or bad news, but the state has weighed in on the the city's housing element. They've made a number of changes, corrections, things that they wanted to have. The comment period for the public to comment on the revised housing element is the end of this month. So if you have any comments about what we're going to be doing for housing in the city, which has an indirect effect on the Midcoast, please go to the city's website where you can make comments. That's all I have. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, we have questions for Harvey, starting with Kimberly, who raised her hand right after the buzzer.
Hi, Harvey. Thank you. Just a point of clarification. You said the housing element, we can comment until the end of August or the end of September?
August.
Okay, that's quick. Thanks.
Next was Claire.
Harvey, what things did the state want to change about the housing element?
Oh, it's a long list. You have to go to the website to see the many changes. My first impression is none of them are earth-shaking, but you have to see the long list. So I
Is
don't want
there
to
a
comment.
trend or something, or a general overview?
There were a lot of little things, is my best impression, but I didn't read it in detail. It's pretty long, and I intend to, but I haven't done it yet.
Okay, do we have any questions from the public for Harvey? I don't see any hands raised. So I'd like to introduce Gina Quinney. Am I pronouncing that right, Gina?
Yeah, that's close enough. Sounds good. It's Gina Quiney.
Quinney, okay.
Quiney.
And Gina is our chief of staff. Have I got that right for Ray Mueller?
Correct. I am. So I'm happy to be here stepping in for Mike as he is out celebrating in the next few days his son's marriage.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Gina?
Is she gonna give a report first?
Well, she paused.
I don't have much of a report. Harvey covered a lot of the things that Ray was also has been involved in. Do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns?
Claire does.
Okay.
You may not be in on this, but last week Mike was talking about the safe parking program, and we had reminded him that we were supposed to be involved in that, and he said he would get back to us. Do you know anything?
Got it. My understanding is that you haven't missed out on anything. So that's good news. I know that Supervisor Mueller did a visual survey of potential sites and has had conversations with Matthew Tredester, and it's still very early, and I will follow up with him on where the next steps are, but I do know that aside from the survey of potential locations, there has not been any progress.
Okay, so because we don't even know what those potential locations are. So if he can put us back on the radar, it'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I don't know, I mean, the survey was not an official review or list. It was sort of a general brainstorming. So I don't even know if there is a list. I don't know the sites myself, but we will definitely be following up on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Dan Haggerty has a question. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, hi Gina. Thanks for coming tonight. I wanted to say that before Supervisor Mueller was elected, I showed him several photographs of pedestrian underpasses around the nation and around the world, and how they're being more and more popular. Very functional in a way to get pedestrians safely across the street without impacting the traffic. And he said at the time that he was open to looking into this further for the coast side. Since then, I found out that the city of Boulder, Colorado has 85 underpasses for the bicycles and pedestrians, and it's one of the best. It's known for a very extremely pedestrian friendly and cycle friendly city, one of the most in the country. So the concern is that Connect the Coast Side, all these Highway 1 projects are moving forward. And I did leave a message. I didn't get a return call, but I was hoping that we could start talking about a serious feasibility study and talk about locations where we should have a feasibility study. And so I just wanted to put that on your radar.
Okay. I appreciate that. I will add it to my radar list.
Okay. If I could make an editorial comment, I believe it might be a subject for the next phase of the project you're going to speak to today, Kimberly.
Possibly.
The idea that pedestrian crossings could include underpasses would be part of what would be considered in that study. So,
I actually don't know that that's part of that, but maybe.
one motorcycle. Okay,
It's really time for questions for Gina, right?
yeah, it is time for question from Gina, and Kimberly had one.
So I just wanted to follow up on Claire's question and just more broadly, one of the things that we've been emphasizing to Mike O'Neill is that recently there have been conflicts in scheduling with the MCC meetings and various topics that we haven't been included on to the last minute. And as the advisory body to the supervisor's office, we'd like the supervisor staff to make a greater effort in making sure that the MCC is notified of things that are happening early enough that we, that we aren't caught off guard. That's it.
I appreciate your comment. I can say with certainty, because I've worked at the county for a long time now, this is a challenge across the board with many of the commissions. And I think we can definitely continue to improve how we bring issues to the boards and commissions prior so that we can truly get your advice on things going forward. So I hear you and I will take note. I appreciate that.
Okay, and for the record, Gus Matamal has joined us almost. I see no questions for the public. Gina, you might want to check your chat. And
Check my chat.
I see other public officials are here. I don't know if they wish to speak. If so, please raise your hand. I'm just taking a wait to see if any of the other people who I know are on boards wish to speak. And so far, nothing. All right. So with that, I'm going to move on to public comment and announcements. Members of public who wish to speak on any item that is not on the agenda, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any raised hands. So, all right, I will move on to the consent agenda, which includes approving the minutes of August 16th. And I'll ask if any council member wishes to object. And yes, I wish to object because I received several minutes. Kimberly sent me some and sent me some. I did not have time to review them. I just thought it was not responsible for me to put them before the council without me checking, the spelling of Lisa Ketchum's name and some of the other things that just I tripped over. So at the next regular meeting, we're going to have probably 4 sets of minutes. All right. Those two, this meeting and the one that Scott skipped when he ditched us and left town. All right. So we'll get those minutes in good order. I just want to acknowledge we will be keeping up with them and there has been work done in the background.
So
Kimberly?
do we have to formally pull because they're listed on the agenda?
Yeah, I am formally requesting we pull them from the agenda. And I don't think that takes a vote. Okay, so now we're on to the regular agenda. Kimberly, do you want you or Shanda to be made co-host to present materials?
Is Chata on the?
Yeah.
Oh, there she is.
There, I'm on. I don't have any formal presentation materials prepared, so I'm just here to speak and answer questions. So I don't need to be a co-host if this works.
All right, well, I'll turn it over to Kimberly and you run this agenda item for us.
Okay, so at the last council meeting, we sort of introduced this item and talked briefly about what some of the issues were and the request, which is to approve a letter in support of a grant application for the next phase of the Moss Beach Highway 1 Congestion and Safety Improvements Project. Chanda answered many of the questions that we sent to her, and she also answered the questions that were posed during the last meeting. And I believe those were circulated to the entire council. So at this juncture, to maximize our time, I think it would be best served by questions and discussion while we have Chanda here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Do we have questions first from the council on the email, then a reply that Chandra sent? Dan does.
Yes, I didn't have time to really get to it, sorry. You know, I think that it is reasonable to ask to kind of respond to the question so that the community, because this is a response direct to the council, and so the rest of the community won't be aware. Would you like can we have it on record so that the community can hear the response? I think that that's appropriate and reasonable.
So are you suggesting that we read out all of the questions that Shonda previously answered in writing and have her respond to them verbally?
Or, you know, maybe Sandra can summarize the email.
Shonda, would you be comfortable doing that?
Sure, I can do my best. You know, you asked a fair number of questions at the last meeting and previously, so I will try not to spend too much time, but hopefully it'll help clarify what's happening and what has happened. So, you know, I think so the project that we're talking about is called the Moss Beach State Route 1 Congestion and Safety Improvements Project. We presented to the MCC in September of 2021 to seek a grant for the current phase of the project that we're working on now, which is called Project Initiation. It's a required phase. It's actually considered a pre-phase, like we're in the K phase. So even before it's considered like a real project by Caltrans is the phase of the project that we're in. And the intent is to follow Caltrans guidelines and rules, and we have a cooperative agreement, what's called a cooperative agreement with Caltrans. So we have funding from the Transportation Authority, who has funding for a consultant team, and then funding allocated to Caltrans to be able to prepare this project initiation document. And what it's really doing is taking what were just concepts and Connect the Coast side one step further in evaluation to sort of prepare us for the phase that we're seeking funding for now. So which is called the project approval and environmental document phase, which is considered the first real phase actually of a project. So the project as it's conceived right now on paper is to look at what was recommended in Connect the Coast side, which is evaluating roundabouts at Cypress in California and a signal at 16th Street, and signals at Cypress and California and 16th Street as a secondary alternative. In addition, there are variations for both of those alternatives. So one of the variations is looking at 16th Street and Carlos Street, different options there. Both alternatives include medians or no medians. All of the alternatives include looking at bike lanes and a Class 1 bicycle and pedestrian path. So really, it's trying to realize the recommendations and Connect the Coast side. The document that's being prepared is a very technical document. It's essentially assembling a lot of the information that's already been out there and prepared, in addition to doing further evaluation, like looking at preliminarily what agencies, environmental agencies would we have to consult during the environmental period? What anticipated environmental impacts might we have? What type of stormwater data would we have to collect? What type of further transportation analysis would we have to do? So it's really setting out a scope of work for the next phase of the project, which is the project approval and environmental document phase, which is the letter of support before you. So that is the kind of like the project in a nutshell. Sort of what we're looking at is really just Connect the Coast side's recommendations, which, as I think we've all talked about before, have come from previous planning documents like the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study, the Highway 1 Preliminary Planning Study, and others. During the phase that we're seeking funding for, project approval and environmental document, this is where kind of the first sort of real phase of the project where we're doing environmental studies. And so the goal is to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. And it's when further investigation of the potential interventions are going to be looked at in a lot more detail. So that's where we would think and do more evaluation of what actually would be feasible or not feasible, and really it's based on the environmental impacts. So if we find that there's a significant species impact, that would be put into the environmental document, and either the project would, a mitigation would be recommended or an impact would be stated, and the project move forward with that, with those changes, or not at all. So it's really about, like, right now, everything is still very much in flux, I would say. So it's sort of like the 1.5 step after connect the co-side. So really, I guess I had written this in the email, in short, this current phase is to just do this the first formal step in the Caltrans process to work towards improvements on State Route 1 in Moss Beach by engaging in more detailed evaluation and following Caltrans requirements. And so if we don't pursue this next phase of funding, we won't be able to do any of the environmental evaluation of the alternatives that are recommending, and going for funding for this next phase doesn't actually guarantee any future funding for design or construction. It's just the next step in a required process. So I think the question before the council today, at least from my perspective, is, does the council feel like it's in the best interest of the Midcoast to continue evaluating infrastructure investments in Moss Beach and alternatives? And if so, then this would be the next step in a required process by Caltrans. So that was sort of a response, hopefully, I don't know if that was helpful or not, to talk about the outcomes of phase 1 and kind of what we're doing for phase 2.
No, that's very helpful. I see Greg has a question.
Yeah, I have a couple. Maybe they all relate. In March, when I was posting the agenda at Moss Beach, it rained. It was about the second hour of the rainstorm. I went over to the post office. Carlos Street right there at Etheldora was flooded and impassable for returning. So one question is, does this project include consideration of stormwater and improved drainage at the intersection of Carlos, Etheldora, and Highway 1? From your email reply, that intersection is covered, but my specific question is stormwater. And let me ask the other questions so you can maybe answer them all at the same time. The other end, where 16th Street joins, is going to be the subject of some work if the Cypress Point project goes through. And if I read it correctly in the EIR, the drainage is going to be directed down Montera Creek, which also is going to have stormwater implications for the intersection at 16th there. So the question is, would this study consider the stormwater capacity changes necessary to handle the extra 140-something thousand square feet of impermeable surface that is coming off of the Cypress Point project, the rainwater that's coming off of that surface? And then I guess my last question is this work going to wait until a decision is made on the final design of Cypress Point? That's it.
Okay, so as you know, I'm not a stormwater expert. But certainly drainage and stormwater and earthwork and geotechnical stuff is all going to be a part of this project's design, and if it ever is ultimately constructed, right? So if we are creating impervious services as part of the project, because we ultimately, we go through this whole process, and as we get to the design phase, we know that that would be part of the project's design and development, and evaluation of stormwater runoff and effects on biological, like ASBS, like areas of significant biological systems, would all be evaluated as part of the next phase of the CEQA, like as part of the CEQA NEPA document. So I guess the short of it, if I can summarize, is that yes, it would be taking into account and evaluating those impacts and be taking those into account in the design. I think it's important though to remember that detailed design, when we're working through a Caltrans process, that doesn't actually happen until later. So we would be identifying the impacts as part of this next phase. So things like there are stormwater implications, there are geotechnical implications like hydrology and stormwater as part of our CEQA initial study checklist. And so those things would be identified and a statement would be made about what the potential impact of the project could be and how it could mitigate for it. But in terms of the like the very specific, exactly how that would happen at the next phase of the project after this PAED phase.
Well, the reason I raise it is because that in New England, I've seen rotaries and roundabouts designed two ways. One is canted inward so that the cars better adhere to the rotary as they traverse it. That would put all the stormwater drainage in the center of the rotary and require extra culverts and drainage under the highway. The other way they're designed is with a slight crown outward. And the problem there is it creates hazards in wet weather because the cars tend to spin off the rotary. Okay. And I'm just alerting you to the fact that at both those locations, there are going to be stormwater issues. So when you're making a decision about what your preferred alternative is, I don't think you can make that decision with respect to a roundabout without having some analysis of the stormwater and how you're going to ensure the safety of people spinning around the intersection.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think that's why it's also important to remember that there is no recommendation for a preferred alternative at this phase. That has to happen after all of the public hearings and public process in the environmental phase. So that comes later. And then for the actual, I mean, I think it's a really great point in terms of design specifications. I'll just, we're going to have a meeting on September 19th from 6 to 8 p.m. and we'll be posting more information on the website as well as it's prepared with the project concepts. So people will be able to get more of a sense in more detail of what it could look like. And these types of comments are really helpful, I think, in further informing and then thinking about the design phase and environmental phase. So as we move forward with the project, we would want to make sure to incorporate that feedback in those phases as well.
Claire?
So in terms of your question around like project timeline, Cypress Point and this project are independent projects. We are seeking resources for this project because there's been a stated issue in this area through Connect the Coast Side, and for many years with or without Cypress Point, there are safety issues and concerns. And congestion concerns. So this project is moving forward. We're trying to move this project forward and realize the recommendations of Connect the Coast Side, sort of irrespective of what private development may happen in the area.
Okay, I'd like to go to Claire next.
Chandra, I wanted to thank you for your thorough response. I was really impressed that you took the time not only to look at our question list, but to go back and listen to our meeting and see what we were talking about. I really appreciated that. The one thing that I was most concerned about, which we brought up last time, was whether or not this funding that you're applying for now is going to commit you to something that we don't know about yet. And it sounds like it doesn't. It sounds like you're applying just for funding that will help you continue to study. Is that basically the case?
That's correct. So, I mean, I think, right now there will be project alternatives in this project initiation document, which will be presented to the community on September 19th and released to the public once we've had a chance to incorporate Caltrans's comments. So I want, everybody to know that it's really just a timeline issue that we need to put in we need to incorporate Caltrans's feedback prior to sharing things out. So it will have there's always a no build alternative, like do nothing. And then there's these alternatives that I've mentioned that have some, that are basically from Connect the Coast side. And so as we move through the environmental phase, prior to that, we would be looking at those alternatives, right? But it doesn't actually commit us to either one. And at the end of the process, it may be that there are too many environmental impacts, and as the CEQA lead agency and the NEPA lead Caltrans would say, this project, they would choose not to move forward with the project, right? Like that's a possibility. There's also the possibility that there would be modifications to the project based on what is said to us during all of the public hearings that would happen during the environmental phase. So if we're presenting the concepts in the environmental phase, and we hear, for example, that, of some issue that could inform the alternative. So you're correct. So I just want to underscore that there's no preferred alternative right now, and it doesn't actually commit us to, we want to do something in this area, but what is stated in this PID is not a commitment that we will do anything, because it has to be further evaluated. It is not anywhere near being a shovel ready project.
So on the 19th, we're unlikely to be presented with a fait accompli that we vote to support tonight before we know what it is.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand.
Okay, on the 19th at the meeting.
Yes.
It's unlikely that you're going to come up with something that's going to surprise us.
I don't think so. I mean, it's roundabouts, it's signals, it's a bike path, it's the multimodal trail, and it's bike lanes, and it's crossings. So I feel like we've talked about these a lot through Connect the Coast side and the other studies. I don't think we're coming up with anything that is going to be a huge surprise. It feels like we're just trying to make those concepts one step closer to fitting in with the framework and the constraints of the area.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Anne and then Dan. Anne, can you unmute?
Thank you. Yes, I can. So I know you've kind of addressed my question before about the earthquake data, and you said that will be looked at with the area that you're proposing the building in, as well as the multimodal trail. But I also wanted to make sure that we discuss the endangered species that are present in the areas of the multimodal trail in particular, that you're proposing. And I have video actually from Joe Leclerc where he mentions about the red-legged frog and the possibility that it cannot be built where they are, because they are extremely endangered. 90% of their population is gone, and we're one of the few areas that they are still surviving in. So I mean, that is of great importance to me personally, but I'm sure to many. So I just want to make sure there are alternatives, like moving it across the highway, and then with Dan's suggestion of having underpasses and things like that, is this possible to look at anything like that?
So yeah, we're definitely aware of the California red-legged frog, and there's other potential species impacts that are implicated on the project because of the proximity to, the area of biological significance, the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve. There's the creek, close to 16th Street. So there's a lot of, beyond just the species, there's water impacts and other impacts that basically the document that's being worked, that is, currently in draft form right now, really it kind of identifies, like, these are all the possible things. We would need to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We would need to do this kind of study. We need to do this kind of study. And so what would my understanding of what would happen next is really further evaluating what the impacts of the project would be and the extent of those impacts of the project, right? So I am definitely no CEQA expert, so please don't quote me on any of this, but it's like, you kind of like say, in your document, this is what the impacts are going to be and and what potential mitigations could be, right? So if there is a species impact, like many projects in California will have an impact, but they may be able to mitigate those impacts, right? So mitigation just means addressing them in some way. So I don't know the extent, because I'm not a biologist, of like what that looks like what those mitigations could be, but that is an avenue. Then there's impacts that could be found that are called significant and unavoidable, meaning that there is an impact on a species, it's totally unavoidable, and decision makers would have to make a decision based on the project as a whole, the stated benefits of it and everything, whether those impacts, even if they're significant and unavoidable, whether the project would move forward, right? So all of that analysis and disclosure sort of happens during this environmental phase per the California Environmental Quality Act. So yes, aware of the impact in terms of, so the project could be modified because of that. If it's a feasible modification, right? In terms of the underpasses and overpasses, we've been talking about that since Connect the Coast Side was in development and likely prior. The project right now is not recommending underpasses or overpasses. It's recommending at-grade crossings where there will be intersection controls, meaning a roundabout or a signal, and higher visibility crossings. And there are some communities where underpasses have worked and can work really well. Largely, though, the Federal Highway Administration does not recommend. They recommend underpasses and overpasses as a measure of last resort. They really recommend using traffic calming and installing a pedestrian activated signal or some other thing because of the maintenance costs, the safety concerns. On the coast side especially, it would require a lot of earthwork and grading to be able to provide an ADA accessible underpass.
Well, they have elevators, so they use elevators. So
there's flooding, there's the utility concern around the elevators and the maintenance. And so I hear you that I know like the congestion related issues that have been studied so far are largely due to Highway 1 speed traffics and not being able to get on and off the highway safely because of those traffic volumes and speeds. And it's having an overpass or an underpass would likely conflict with a lot of the visual resources elements of the LCP, because we have strong resources to protect the look and feel of the coast side, as all of you know. And so anyway, the long and short of the long way of saying it is that, the plan does not include, just like Connect the Coast Side did not recommend overpasses or underpasses, this project is not recommending an underpass or an overpass.
Okay, I just want to make sure, Anne, did that answer your question? Are you good?
It did. And then I just had one more if I could. And that is that many of the areas, particularly like Carlos, if you're going down Carlos, the grade of the slope is greater than 8%, which is not safe for anyone who is ADA, who is wheelchair bound. And so I don't know if anything like that is addressed as well during this phase of the study, or is that something that comes later if you were to put in a multimodal trail somewhere?
So that's a good question. I don't know whether, unless they're designated ADA, right, like not all trails that are put in are ADA accessible. So I hear you on the slope. I think that the design would have to, we would want to take into account in a future project. So that section, and this I think was, during the last meeting, Len was trying to share it. I tried to explain it in my email, and I don't know if it was clear, which is that section of Carlos Street is not included in this particular project. So that would definitely be a future study. But like one of the ways that creating a more accessible trail is often done is by creating things like landing, like areas to be able to stop and pause, like landing, like slope flat landing areas, things like that. You can do things like meandering, but I don't know the details. Like that would have to be part of a future study, a different project.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Dan?
Yeah. Let's see. So just to follow up, just to be really clear on Claire's question, there will be no conditions attached to this grant. Or is that true or is that false?
So us working on the project approval and environmental document is the next phase of the project. For us to actually build a project, we would still need to get money for design and money for construction. Just because we go through the environmental clearance process, it doesn't necessarily mean that we would be, it doesn't commit us to building anything.
So there are conditions.
It would allow us to possibly build something depending on the outcome of the actual process, which right now is unknown, right? Because it could be that it is found that there is no build alternative recommended, right?
So
Like
it
that's
sounds
a
like
potential outcome.
It sounds like there are conditions that you can't like share with us right now, but we'll always have the option to opt out at the end. That's what you're saying, I think.
So the grant itself commits us to completing what we're trying to do is complete the project approval and environmental document phase. That's the agreement that we would have
No other conditions.
with
It's
the
just to move through
transportation
that.
authority.
No other conditions. Is that correct? It's
That's my
just
understanding. I mean, it's just like any other project, like you need money for all the stuff. So if you don't have the money, you can't build it. You can't do anything about it.
I know sometimes when there's a grant, that, it has to be done a certain way. You have to follow this procedure.
Well, right. So the procedures are laid out very clearly, which is we have to follow Caltrans's requirements for the phase and
Right.
CEQA
So
and NEPA rules. So that part of it, yes, does apply. We need to follow the law and we have to follow Caltrans procedures. But in terms of the outcome of once this phase is complete, I think the county is interested in furthering infrastructure improvements in this area because of the clear need. What those exactly are going to be is not a guarantee at present or at this phase.
Okay. I was trying to go back to the map that Len Erickson brought to the last meeting, and then I was able to access. I believe it was through the county website on this, but it's all changed. All that information is gone. Was there any update? I can't seem to find the information that was shared last Saturday or last meeting. It just says it focuses. What I did find, it just focuses 3. It doesn't highlight where the sidewalks are going to go. There's just a big blue line and it says 3 intersections of focus. And which is
so the map that Len put together, because I had some extenuating circumstances, and so he was able to present last week, was from Connect the Coast Side. So if you're on the Connect the Coast Side webpage, there's an interactive GIS map that was prepared for that planning effort that has sort of all of the recommendations in the plan in one place. You can kind of see how they go together. It's a lot. The line on the map doesn't say it's going to go exactly right here and this is right. It's a concept. And so that was what Len was using to show what I just described as all the concepts that are being thought out during this phase and put into these alternatives for evaluation. So what we have on our project website right now, that map is just trying to show that we're looking at that whole area and we're looking at those 3 intersections. But I'm sharing with you now that on the 19th, we'll have much more detailed visuals to present that go above and beyond the lines on the map.
okay. Yeah, it's just that I've been part of all this discussion. I've been to so many meetings where so many community members came out and they gave up their, evenings to give their input. And I remember a lot of the input was to not have sidewalks and to have more of a safe path to keep the rural feel, and concerns with lighting up the just totally altering the the wildlife feel, the natural feel. I take it we're gonna be able to talk about it again at this meeting. It's September 19th, 6 to 8 p.m.
Yeah.
And
at
how
the- Go ahead.
where will it be and how will it be?
At the supervisor's co-site office, so I think it's the address is 270
And
Capistrano
how,
Road.
and how are you going to announce to the community to get a robust participation?
So I will be I'll be posting on our website. I'll be sending out an email to our Connect the Coast side email list and those that have signed up via the webpage. And then we will be doing a postcard mailer. And then hoping that, groups like yourself can also post and promote the meeting. So, I'm hope we're going to be doing a noticing, and we hope that others can promote and share the information. So in addition to the meeting, that'll be a place that if you want to come in person, you can do that. We're going to leave the materials up so that people can come by anytime and take a look at them. And then we'll also post the same information and on our webpage in a recording so that people can submit comments online if you don't want to come to the meeting. And then we will come back to the MCC on the 11th, as was talked about the last time, so we can share a summary of what we've heard and talk about any answers to questions that came up that we weren't able to answer during the open house.
Okay.
So I will commit that we will post the notice on our
Sure.
website and distribute it as appropriate. And I'm sure Dan and Kimberly will make sure I do it when we get the notice.
Okay.
Did you have something else?
Yes. And so I wanted to remind you that most collisions, pedestrian collisions, happen at signaled intersections. This is well documented, and all the issues you brought up about reasons to not have pedestrian unpasses. I'm sure that I could show you, if you were willing to sit down, all of these solutions. You can see from other projects very easily how they are not a problem. They actually work. And as far as roundabouts versus signals, in the past, I requested the Vision soft.
It's happening,
Pardon?
Dan, for you. It's happening.
You're
There
going to do
will
it
be a-
now.
It's
You're gonna do it.
happening. It's part of this process. Yes, I have.
Okay,
the
so we're going to be able to
consultants
look
are
at the
working on it.
the inputs of the data, right? We're going to be able, it's going to be transparent. Because that's of course critical to give an accurate presentation to the
So,
community.
I'm not a traffic engineer. I don't know the ins and outs of the modeling. The person who is putting that together from the consultant team will probably be able to answer questions about the specific inputs. But
this is
they
gonna be-
basically have to create like a mini universe, so it's I'll let it work. Hold on one second. Sorry.
Is that your last question?
Sorry, my son just walked in. Just give me 1 second, please.
I just want to confirm that that's going to be presented at the meeting. September 19th.
Okay, so yeah,
So the vision presentation will be presented on September 19th. Is that correct?
yeah, and we'll post the video, the simulation my understanding is we're gonna be posting the simulation video to the webpage as well.
And the data being used, right? That's going to be.
That part I don't know the details on because it's a whole other software. So I think that we could talk more on the 19th about the inputs with the traffic engineer who's working on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Gus, did you have any questions?
No, I appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation that you gave. It sounds to me, and correct me if this is a wrong summary, but all this thing, what we vote on tonight would only commit, this thing only that you're applying for funding for only commits you to producing of like a 400-page PDF that outlines what would happen next. Is that correct? Like that's the only
I mean,
actual.
the letter of support that you would be writing would be supporting, hold on, sorry. So it commits us to working on the environmental document, which yes, would like be a very large document that would lay out all of the environmental impacts and would work through, we would also prepare a project report, which is another required Caltrans approval document that yes, would be a very large document that talks about all of these issues in a lot more detail. So your letter is for supporting me going after a grant to get money to do that next phase through the program of through the highway program, which is where we got the funding to do this current phase.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, and then I just have one last clarifying question, and forgive me, but the title of phase 2 is environmental document and project approval. And you mentioned that in that phase, we would complete the project approval. When you say project approval, does that mean at the end of phase 2 that there will be a step where we will actually approve a project going forward? I lost her.
Sorry, it's just with the 2 kids now and the bedtimes and the stuff, I have an infant, so I think we're just falling apart over here. Okay, so the approval, no, so technical studies are developed in this phase, and then the agencies that like are the decision makers because they are the owners and operators of this right of way, right? Caltrans would go through if there's a process to sort of officially choose a preferred alternative and then the no build alternative after all of the public comment is done. So the project approval piece is really talking about all of those agencies. So it's like seeking the permits and all of that to actually approve the project to move forward to the next phase. And that would be where, and then during this next phase is when like a preferred alternative would be picked, if any. So it's like, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Should we go to the public?
Public questions through Kimberly.
Okay, I see Dolores has a question. Dolores, can you unmute yourself?
Hello, thank you, Chandra. That was very informative and clarified a lot of things. But one thing that kind of I got stuck on in the slides that Len presented last time was the time frame that has been outlined, because it seems really aggressive. I don't know, can you tell me if this is just like based on something, or is it, or you really think you can do this?
So the time, you're right, the timeline that is laid out is aggressive. It includes it includes the timeline that is typical for a Caltrans process. So we know, for example, that the environmental phase, depending on the project type, can be like 12 months or, 28 months or 36 months, right? So we put it, but like it's typical that it's 24 months. And the plan specifications and estimates phase is a certain amount of time, and that's very typical. So Caltrans has recommendations for how much time should be budgeted for each of those phases. And so what that timeline is predicated on is that we end a phase and we seek funding and get funding for the next phase. So for example, if we don't get the grant for this phase that we're seeking money for, then the project approval and environmental document phase could not happen in January of 2024, right? Like we would need to seek funding for that phase from another source. And so that would move out the entire timeline, but it is based on like a a more optimal reality, but it is based in reality. Like that is a typical timeline for each of those phases.
Okay, so Connect the Coast side had projected something like beyond 16 years.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, right, when we were writing Connect the Coast side, I didn't know whether we would get money for this project initiation phase. I didn't know whether, like, what would be able to happen. And so I would say that for this particular project, the timeline that we should be looking at is the one that's presented on our webpage. The Connect the Coast side, we wanted to put in a more conservative timeline because we weren't sure, right, exactly when the stars would align and we would be able to acquire funding and resources to move certain things forward, which
Now-
is still the case. So it's still, you know, we don't know for sure, right? But
Of course.
yeah.
Yes, but I'm just shocked because it's very, I mean, it's like saying it can happen in 7 years, and that seems highly unlikely from anything we've ever seen here on the coast. I mean, you know, it's I guess my real question is, what is a typical Caltrans project? Because this seems to be quite a big one because there's 3 intersections involved, plus all the other things that are involved. So I was, what is a typical project? I mean, is it?
Gosh, that's such a hard question. And I feel like I don't have enough experience, right, working on projects in Caltrans, but so like, for example, the multimodal, the trail section that was built, already, right? Like, or more recently, right? The south of Coronado, like that project was done through a very different Caltrans approval and permitting process because it is less complicated than the one that we're doing. But I think that the big picture, what, you know, if Caltrans wants to move a project forward, like if they have their own suite of projects that they work on that are independent of the local jurisdiction, if that makes sense. So like, I know that you guys have maybe talked about, maybe Len has presented on the multi-asset, or maybe Caltrans came and presented to the MCC on the State Route 1 multi-asset roadway rehabilitation project. So like that is entirely a Caltrans led and funded project. And it comes from a source that is for roadway rehabilitation and maintenance. Projects like this, like the Moss Beach project that we were talking about tonight, or the multimodal parallel trail, are projects that are led by the local jurisdiction. So we're considered like the project sponsor. Like we want the project, right? Caltrans is the authority that's going to say or help decide, are we allowed to do the project? But we're kind of pushing forward that we would like to do something here because it impacts our communities. And so, you know, it really is just so dependent, unfortunately, on, you know, what resources are available, and like the complexity of the project does make a big difference. I think I've said this before in meetings also, but it's, you know, like the coast side doesn't compete well for funding because you don't have a lot of density. There's a lot of environmental impacts. It's a complex place. And so, you know, you don't have the population, right? The income, like all the things are stacked against you from a funding perspective from the outside, right? Like when we're trying to compete with places like, you know, San Jose or like Los Angeles or anywhere else, right? So it just really depends on. So I think part of like right now, you know, we're feeling lucky, like we applied for the funding for this phase. We got it. Maybe, I hope we will get the funding for this next phase. It'll move it forward. But like a lot of things have to line up to where we are.
And certainly the funding for the projects. I mean, for the actual construction, because that we're talking about a lot of money there.
Yeah. It's a big, so, you know, like what I'm right. And I welcome all ideas, is trying to think about and research what are kind of the large federal grants that we could apply for, you know, in the future that would help support this project through like federal land access or coast. Like there's other things that could help support a project like this that are not just in the purview of, like we're gonna have to piece together a strategy. Right. So it's,
lots of things can happen. And I think about all the
Yeah, it's
climate change
complicated.
impacts too that are coming our way. So,
Yes,
well, thank you. I think that was a very thorough presentation and I very much appreciate it.
sure.
Thank you, Dolores. Are there any other comments from the public?
Seeing none.
I don't see any. So at this point, should we turn back to the council to consider the letter?
Do you want a motion to approve it?
I move we approve the letter as drafted and presented to the council.
So there, we do have.
We have a second with Gus.
Okay, we do have two requests to add changes to the letter.
From where?
I have one from Lynn Erickson, and then one in the chat from Rob. Do we entertain those at all?
Of course, you're running the show.
Well, I don't know process wise.
So we have a chat from Rob. Can you see it? He has asked that the third paragraph be changed from MCC to San Mateo County Transportation Authority, and he has a quote: "Some stakeholders have requested that this project include a feasibility study for a pedestrian underpass across SR1 in the Moss Beach area, or a preliminary analysis comparing overpass to underpass options."
And then I'll just read Lynn's. Lynn wants to add to the end of the fourth paragraph from the end. Some stakeholders have expressed concern about use of Carlos Street to handle bike and pedestrian traffic in a segment of the parallel trail. We expect this concern to be addressed after the Cypress Point CDP process is finished.
And where would that go?
At the end of the fourth paragraph from the end.
Okay.
From my perspective, if I may, I would advise not adding these two changes because that particular information is not really going to have an impact on the people that we should ask that information of. This letter is focused on the grant itself, and so if we add things like that into the letter, that's sort of introducing more concern rather than full support, if that makes sense.
So as I understand the process, somebody has to nominate to add one or both of these amendments. And then so we need a motion and a second, and then we would have to vote on that. So the question we have to ask is, do we have someone in favor of Rob's amendment? Seeing none.
Yes,
We do. Dan.
yes.
Okay, do we have a second for Rob's amendment? Hearing none. Do we have a second for Len's amendment? Do we have a nomination or a sponsor for Len's amendment? Hearing none. Okay, so I believe I followed proper protocol. The motion is unamended and you may call for a vote.
Okay, so do you want me to?
I think Claire will read the roll.
Gus? Yes. Dan?
I'm gonna vote no in protest because I feel like it's a process that's committing us to have everything Caltrans way. So
Okay.
my vote's no.
Kimberly?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
I'm yes, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4 to 1.
And for a note, we are not having Ann vote because we're preserving her emergency exemptions for future use. Okay, so I believe that concludes the agenda item, correct, Kimberly?
I think so.
Okay,
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Shanda, thanks for coming so much. Check your chat.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the letter of support. Take care, everybody. And sorry, apologies for the interruptions from my child. Good night.
Okay. So we now have to discuss the Cypress Point review of the EIR. And I have tried to put together a process here that makes some sense, but it's of course open to council feedback on how we conduct this. Let me see if I can share my screen and make it large enough that everybody can see it. Participants can now see your screen. Okay, good. Now, here were the responsibilities that we sent out. And the concept was people would make bullet point comments on the sections they were assigned to read and the appendices related to those. And then we would come to this meeting and discuss whether we had the right bullet points, agreed or disagreed on the bullet points. We would take feedback from the public on other bullet points. Okay. So what I'm proposing as a process here is we review the feedback we've received from the 3 council members who submitted bullet points in writing. And that starts with Dan. And then I'm going to go second, simply no offense, Ann, I think mine will be faster. Okay. And then we go to Ann, who submitted quite a number of them. And at the conclusion of those, we can invite the council members to state their own additional bullet points or disagree with the bullet points that have been raised. And then we can open it up for public comment. And at the conclusion of the public comment, we should discuss how we proceed, because we have to get a written reply in by September 25th. And our September 27th meeting is too late. So that means the meeting of September 13th or an extra special meeting would have to be called if we wanted to, alter a document. All right. So with that, I'd like Dan to speak to, assuming we can read this, Dan, the email you sent should be on the screen on the aesthetics of Cypress Point, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, so the overall aesthetics of the project, to me, it's it's boring, simple, and it's the repetitive design and the same colors. It just looks like a housing project. So the community is rich in a wide variety of colors and architectural variations. This project is repetitive. Everything looks the same, with essentially the same. Yes, some buildings are a little bigger and some are a little smaller, but they all look the same. The clubhouse, I guess that's the community building. That's on its own, a little different, but yeah. So I just don't feel that it blends in with the community, seeing this essentially what looks like a housing project campus. And I think that they could do a better job to design it in a way that would just blend in better with the community. And as far as the lighting, I did not find any. I did see some pictures of some light fixtures that may be used that look like they don't shine up to the sky, but there's no indication of what's on the screen now. Is can you scroll down to the title of
Up to the title?
Yeah. So it says the 5% principles of responsible outdoor lighting. All lighting should have a clear purpose. Light should be directed in a way where only to where it's needed. The light should be no brighter than necessary. Sometimes there's conflicts with county codes. They say, oh, it has to be this bright. Well, it's and then the let's see. Yeah, it should only be used when it's useful. But I think the most important aspect of this is when warmer colors, more of an amber, it's listed here, limit the amount of short wavelength, the blue violet light to the least amount needed. When this is done, all the other problems seem to go away. When the Travis Longcourt talked about, go to the hardware store and get a simple bug light, a yellow light. That's essentially a very warm color of light. And we have these now throughout the Midcoast in our street lights. I think the technical term is 2200K, I believe, is the color. It's the color is measured in kelvins. But yeah, so I'm not seeing any of this information in the draft EIR, and I wanted to bring it up. I think that they should clearly outline how they're going to use what type of lights you're going to use and what color.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Now I'm gonna try and zoom back down. And I will apologize to the community. I was adding to this slide deck up until a couple of hours ago. I had 11 pages of notes. I have lots of clarifying emails, and I try to condense this into bullet points. I have outreach to the Water District, CAL FIRE, CFPD, the City and County Association of Governments, some engineering firms, transportation consultant, USGS, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and I also heard back just before the meeting from a geologist from the state of California, because I'm just trying to gather facts to support my observations. So I made some comments on the wildfire section. They show a buffer zone of 1 mile, but in fact, there's a half a mile distance between some parts of the very high fire wildfire and the project. And those of us who studied wildfire know that embers carry miles. We had Rich Sampson come here and talk about embers carrying 3 to 5 miles. So I think that we need to see the simulations that they ran and the assumptions they used. Those of us who were involved in the RCD scoping project, which used simulations, are very familiar with how improper assumptions can bias the results. And so they don't show the simulations, they just state conclusions. And I want to see the data. It's the same kind of thing Dan was asking for. You should be aware that when Montera did their urban water management plan in 2017, 39% of the hydrants in Moss Beach were listed as below standard. They were, however, legal because all they had to do was fight 1 2-hour design fire at a single family residence. We're now facing a complex with quadruplexes and 71 units. And it's unclear to me that the previously to code legal standard is adequate. I would look to CAL FIRE to make a comment on that, but it's a concern. They mention how wide the driveway is, but they don't mention how narrow Carlos Street is. Okay, and I think that's misleading. Dan, I just want to run through my points.
I was just going to ask real quick, has the room cooled down enough to where we could?
Let's just leave it for a while, but I'll be with you in a few seconds. I'm unclear on the access by emergency vehicles, but I have driven the back roads to get to Lincoln on what I consider the east side of this project. And it's a lot of sharp turns and portions of the road are unpaved. And I'm unclear again what the simulation was showing for the vehicles to get to rescue the people in this project. I want to know if they were showing the fire engines coming around to the east side, or were they all going through the Carlos Street driveway at the same time all the people were fleeing? I really want to see how that worked. I also would comment that while the streets are paved on Stetson and Carlos and part of Sierra, there are large portions of those streets that are not paved. And the question is, when they're wet, will they support the fire trucks? I already made the point about seeing the simulation. And you should be aware that, and I'll cover this elsewhere, they have massively understated the amount of cars and traffic, and I'll get into why. Okay, so then I made comments on the traffic. My overriding comment parallels what we saw in stormwater. The Moon Ridge project, permitted by the county and constructed and operated by Mid-Penn, proves they're unable to adequately forecast the need for parking. I have driven down and taken videos of 250 cars parked on that road that approaches the entrance to Moon Ridge at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. It's okay there because the road is 4 lanes wide and you can have parking on both sides of the street and still have 2 lanes of traffic down the middle. Carlos is about 1.5 car lengths wide at places. So it's a serious concern when you underestimate the traffic volume, because there's just not going to be the clearance and there's not going to be the safety when people park on the road. I also want to have an explanation of how the children are going to get from that complex to Farallon View School. I don't know if you remember, but the plans to redevelop and improve the Farallon View School were in part based on additional child populations coming to Farallon from this community, from the Cypress Point project. So how are those kids getting there when there's no trail and no buses? That implies more vehicle trips, which I contend are not covered. There's no parking for motorcycles, for unloading, for deliveries and visitors. I view that as crazy in an era where people are ordering DoorDash and other things. Kimberly?
The point about, they actually do address that, motorcycles and other, fossil fuel vehicles. That the point was to try to reduce the dependence on that and to add more infrastructure for electric vehicles and bicycles, which we asked for. So that's the reason why there's no motorcycle spots.
Okay, fine. I view that as a wish, all right, and a good goal, but not a reality. Especially a lot of these people may require caregivers. People order stuff delivered at home. There's got to be places for that. They cite 213 residents. I would suggest it's more like 300. And again, the Moon Ridge experience proves that the population of this complex will be much higher than what they're forecasting. There is also an error in the transportation study that was done by the Kittleson firm. I may have spoken to this in previous meetings, but I have a classmate who's a transportation engineer. He can't explain why they used a transportation manual that was nine years and 2 editions out of date, even though the new version was available a year before the transportation study that Kittleson done was done. So we're missing some of the information, the trip generation sources, and we don't know what they're using. There is, I don't mean to get into the details, but there is a comment in the peer review that they did. I pointed out to Mike Schaller that the information referenced in the comment doesn't exist. They refer to a page 24 and an apartment code of 220, and nowhere in the documentation is that presented. And I had my transportation engineer friend look at it. So it's an incomplete response and likely invalid. And we got to see why they're using what they're using. Kimberly?
So just, you made the comparison with Moon Ridge. Can you tell me how many people live at Moon Ridge?
How many what?
How many residents are at Moon Ridge?
No, I cannot tell you that.
Can you
So-
tell me how many units there are?
81.
Okay.
81. Okay.
That's my understanding. I'll correct myself later if it turns out I'm wrong.
I guess my concern a little is that it's like apples to oranges because of the location of Moon Ridge versus this location. Increased traffic could also be due to visitors who are accessing the coast based on the location of that.
There's no parking for visitors here either. So if they had,
Right, but go ahead, Claire.
I just Googled this. Moon Ridge Apartments has 160 units.
okay, thank you. So the first phase was 81.
So it's apples and oranges.
Okay. Utilities, I made some comments. They cite a Montero Water and Sanitary District plan that's supposed to be updated every 5 years and talk about it as current. In reality, it's 6 years out of date. There is an increased water security risk. There's a hydrologist report, which I have a copy of, that showed that during the last drought in the 3rd year, the age of the water drawn from the Alta Vista Aquifer went from 24 years to 3,000, which was a clue that you're running out of water in that one site. They cut back on the use of that, use the airport wells instead. The airport wells cost money to draw on, but again, they had to. So I'm concerned about the stress. I also am concerned about the effect on the water quality in Montero Creek. I think MWSD will have things to say about this as well, but that's one of their sources of water. Right now, they view it as a pristine, excellent creek. What's going to happen with the runoff from this project? Okay, I made comments on hydrology. And again, and I don't think this is apples and oranges, the county permitted Moon Ridge And I don't know who was responsible for inspecting it or building the stormwater, but we saw in the presentation on stormwater that downstream of Moon Ridge, the Ocean Colony Complex had no problems with the storms of this January. They built that themselves in the late 70s and early 80s. What the county built failed. People had to be moved out of their thing. It's flooded. So I think we are well within our rights to seriously question any claims that are made about this project regarding hydrology and stormwater. I've also seen the stormwater runoff down Carlos and Stetson. The thrust of this project says it's all going to run into Montera Creek, which, as I just mentioned, is its own problem if that runoff occurs. But I would welcome hearing from the community about whether their claim is true, that stormwater from this land only runs down into the creek. I suspect it also runs into Carlos, and I don't know about Stetson, but I've seen, for example, at one of our residents' homes, how the storm drain catches it and runs it right through her property, open. In other words, it's not contained in pipes. There's a thing called a design storm, which is the level of rainfall you have to design to handle. Right now, best information I can find is they're using a 4-inch design storm. Montera Water and Sanitary District has published a report showing 6, 7, and 8-inch storms in recent years. Okay. Any design that does not cover storms that are already prevalent in our area, to me, cannot be used as the basis for this project. So it needs to be re-engineered to do so. They make a comment about safe from tsunami risk. In fact, there was a tsunami of 133 feet just in this century. So 100 feet is not necessarily safe. I was chagrined to hear that. I mentioned the increased potential flooding on Montera Creek. I think people know that the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve is downstream of this project, and there is a requirement that that not be altered or harmed. I really don't understand how they're going to avoid harming the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve further. They are adding a little over 140,000 feet of impermeable surfaces, and it will be more if they do the extra parking that I'm saying they're going to need. Okay. So I really want to understand how they're going to guide that water away from the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve. And there's a citation where they talk about essentially overriding public interest. So the implication is that the public interest from this development would override the public interest of what? The Fitzgerald Marine Reserve, the safety of the streets from flooding, the creek and the water supply. I don't know, but it needs to be explored. I think I've covered some of this. More on hydrology. I have yet to find, but I haven't read everything, the study that shows the retention ponds they're proposing will be sufficient and under what design storm conditions. And I want to confirm that the geology of the site is not susceptible to landslides or mud flow. I had a geologist look at this, and he's not ready to comment on the record or put his certification stamp on anything. But he said there's several faults that have been mapped in the area, but it remains uncertain whether they're active. And he did flag one thing. No certified engineering geologist has reviewed and stamped the EIR. So that kind of puts a real red flag on the entire hydrology section of this report for me. I think I can skip some of these slides. You're aware we have flooding in Moss Beach at Carlos and Etheldor already. You're aware from previous discussions that the sewer engineer from Montera Water and Sanitary District has complained about the stress that has been added. You're aware that the sewer plant is already overflowing, and adding more sewage into it, as well as potentially more infiltration and inflow from this project, could put us in a critical situation. Okay. And I don't see that as being addressed. I'm going to skip a bunch of these. You've already seen some of these. I have a thought, subject to council discussion, that one of the things we do in this letter, besides just offering comments, is we set some preconditions or prerequisites that we feel have to be addressed before this EIR can be accepted. And just from the sections I'm responsible for, this is not to say this is all of them. I think we need a stormwater solution in place and proven at the sewer authority before we can add this project. And if this project takes years to build, that could be feasibly done. We need to readjust the traffic study for realistic vehicle counts. We need to add parking. We need to specify a better design storm. We need to make sure that Montero Water and Sanitary District is involved in this review. They were surprised today when I talked to them about some of the sections of the report. They weren't aware, for instance, there were claims made in the wildfire section that affected the water supply, which were untrue.
Can I say something about that? What I'd like to say is, if they don't know this EIR is here, and if they haven't seen it and they haven't looked at it, that's really kind of their problem. They should have, everybody gets this. We're not the only ones that have it.
Yep, apparently they didn't look in the sections that they didn't think were relevant.
That's really
Concern.
not
just
anybody's fault except theirs.
They are just one person.
Well, I don't want to name any names. There's a team there that will review the thing, and they now are looking at it.
Okay.
Well, there is a question about whether we add an extra hydrant or two in the complex. As I mentioned, the hydrants outside the complex have been low pressure. But it seems to me, and we should get CAL FIRE to weigh in on this, that there should be hydrants right in the complex so that we don't have to run hoses from, blocks away. And I think we need a stormwater management master plan that encompasses this project and shows that we are going to be safe. Okay, so that's it for my review of my sections. And then we have a bunch of comments from Ann. And Ann, does it make sense to have me pull it up and you make a few comments about what you've written? You need to unmute. Right now, the sequence I have them in is fairly random, but I put up your transportation section. So you want to make the bullet points that you're making in these paragraphs?
Sure, I was going to say I could try to pull that up on my end too, and then maybe I could see it a little better, because I think for some of this, the photos say more than any of my words could possibly say.
Well, let's start with 3.10 transportation.
Alrighty. I'm sorry, I had the biological resources up first, so let me go down here. Sorry about that. Oops, that was the one that I sent you at first. It didn't have anything in it. Here we are. Let's see. Is this, nope. I'm sorry. Here we are. Okay, so one of the first things I wanted to discuss with them is that they left Kelmore Street out completely of any analysis. However, it runs right next to the firehouse. I mean, basically beyond the firehouse, and there's a photo that's included at the end of this, but you can see in the photo where the road goes either to the right, which is Stetson, or to the left, which is Kelmore Street. And there's no analysis, and there it is right there. That's the firehouse. And you can see where the roads kind of split, right to the right and to the left. And both are utilized by the firehouse. And I think it's important in that was to show the hill on California. That is if you're walking from Stetson down California, and the slope is unbelievable. Clearly, it is not safe for anyone who's in a wheelchair to try to traverse that. And as far as the road goes, my main comment was that Kelmore Street was left out. Also, there seems to be no analysis of any kind of traffic impacts around the fire station, and that is extremely significant. If you go back to that picture, the first one, you can see the car that's driving, that white car right there, the car on the right-hand side of the road that's black, that is parked. So you can see how narrow this road is with that other car, and this is a two-way road, and that both Stetson and Kelmore Streets are two-way streets. And you can see that car, there's barely even room for a car to drive down. Imagine a fire truck with two-way traffic, and they now have to get to a call, and they have to go down this road. And where are people supposed to pull over? You could barely, if two cars could barely fit on the road, where are people going to pull over? And you have many of the people who are going to be coming from the from Cypress Point, they're going to be coming down these roads because Carlos Street will back up and they're going to have to utilize these other roads. And if they want to come back to the development in a two-way direction, they're going to be utilizing these roads. And that could easily just be jammed with traffic. Now, imagine in an evacuation situation, what happens. I mean, people on these streets are going to be trapped in their driveways, many of them on hillsides like my own. And I mean, this is very concerning, at least to me. And then again, like I said, they did not take into consideration the percent slope, which, you know, Joe Leclerc mentioned anything over 8% makes them, you know, basically impossible for use by anyone who is wheelchair bound. And it's also not safe for individuals. Imagine a child trying to walk down California Street. I mean, that hill is unbelievable. And if you have a young child and you're trying to walk down and people are trying to get to the bus stop at the bottom of that street, it's not an easy walk for anybody. And if you're elderly, I mean, it's strenuous. It's very strenuous. This community is a car dependent community, and you can see from the hillsides around it. This is just, you know, I think that has significance. Then I also wanted to mention about the, you know, earthquake liquefaction zone, which is at 16th Street. I think that is significant. It may make road improvements and a walking path there unsafe. That'll have to be evaluated. I'm sure we'll find out from the study that Shonda is involved in. We'll find more out about that. Also, I mentioned, like you did, Greg, that the number of residents proposed by MidPen does not utilize the 2+1 rule, which allows 2 adults per bedroom plus 1. If that is utilized, and believe me, it will be in this situation, you're talking about 359 adults, not 213 people that they're calculating. Parking places are only available for 142 cars. Now, if you have over 359, almost 360 residents, I can't imagine that the parking is even close to sufficient. And then you also have to imagine, what are the impacts going to be on the road? They mentioned 100 trips a day. That is what they used as their estimate of traffic impact. I think that's impossible to say that they're only going to be 100 trips a day. And then I think there's some mention that there's going to be utilization of buses. Well, the bus right now you have to pick up from Etheldorf Street. I mean, this thing doesn't run that frequent. And believe me, they're not going to just start running lots of buses all day long. I mean, they just don't do it. They haven't even offered us the on-demand Samtrans. If they don't think the people of Moss Beach need it, I can't imagine that they're going to all of a sudden start offering it, because they haven't done that. So I just think it's not right to say, well, that people are just going to use other transportation that's which they've included in their EIR. And it's simply not true. It's not safe to bike. It's not safe to even hardly walk around this area. And so I just think to me, that's unacceptable to make the claims that they're making. And finally,
could we, you want to cover one more thing here? Okay.
No, I was gonna say finally, I think that's it for me on these.
All right. Now you also have wildfire. Can you pull that up?
Yes. All righty. And yeah, so I kind of covered that in this, didn't I, a little bit? And I said the need for evacuation is discussed in terms of exiting the development and the ability of first responders to enter the development. There is no discussion of how surrounding neighborhood would be impacted by an evacuation. And neighbors could find themselves trapped in their driveways. There is no discussion of how fleeing cars from the development would potentially hinder or outright block fire response from Coastside Fire Station 44. Although the development itself is not in the high fire danger zone, the entire roadway north Highway 1 from Montero Mountain across Highway 1 is in a very high fire danger zone. El Granada is surrounded by a very high fire danger. Highway 1 is also in a very high fire danger zone. It's possible that both roadways could become blocked and evacuation may be impossible.
Could I
without
interrupt just quickly, Ann? I wanted to comment, what I read in their simulation was that they relocated people to another site in Moss Beach. In other words, they're evacuating people to a site a few blocks away. To me, that's not a realistic evacuation scenario. I mean,
no, and it's certainly not if there's wildfire coming.
okay, back to you.
What good is that? I mean, I can't imagine that where exactly do they think they're going to relocate anyone to? I don't know, but that's a great point, Greg. And then, also I wanted to say, without proper internet connectivity, all communication can fail, as it did this winter, making it impossible for even first responders to communicate with the outside. What happened in Lahaina can easily happen here on the coast. Now that the broadband funding for the coast has been canceled, the coast remains significantly vulnerable. Cypress Point will significantly strain the roadway system and water supply. Zone Haven and county emergency services rely on the internet and cell service to notify residents who are registered. The water hookup for firefighting is supposedly sufficient for development, according to the EIR, but what about the rest of the neighborhood? How will fire hydrant pressure be affected elsewhere? Is there enough water in storage for firefighting in the Montero Water and Sanitary District service area are my questions. And then I showed the severity map below, and you can kind of see the areas yourself. And there's an awful lot of red and yellow, and that is very high and high. So that's what I have for the.
Okay. And then if you could bring up noise, and I wanted to make another point that you were touching on with wildfire. Just give me a second here. Visitors don't know about Zone Haven, and it's the tourists who are going to be blocking our roads as much as the residents. So I don't see any evacuation strategy that relies on an electronic thing that half the people don't have as being viable. All right, so the next is 3.9 noise.
Okay, and this one, this was, I was talking about construction days and times, I believe are too much to expose residents to nonstop noise from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. I said that no construction should be allowed on weekends, and daily start time should be 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. so as not to interfere with meal times and children trying to get to school. Proper sleep is extremely important at all ages, but especially for children, chronically ill, and elderly. Cumulative and repetitive noise most negatively impacts children, elderly, and those with chronic health problems. Noise is linked to increases in blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing rates, all causing significant health risks. According to the CDC, noise above 70 decibels over a prolonged period may start to damage your hearing. Loud noise above 120 decibels can cause immediate harm to your ears. At 80 to 85 decibels, you can damage hearing within 2 hours. According to OSHA, exposure to 80 decibels or greater for 15 minutes a day can lead to long-term hearing loss. Mitigation is not adequate as proposed. Instead, mitigation should require Midpen to install noise barriers around the construction site. Sound curtains can be attached to fencing to provide a barrier. Various sound barrier products are also found online, and they said that their noise levels are predicted to be between 74 to 88 decibels per day, with pile drivers producing 105 decibels. So, I said that noise barriers around the entire construction site need to be installed to protect residents and wildlife from potential long-term hearing loss. And I think that's really significant. I mean, for anyone who lives in close proximity, it's beyond something that's just annoying. I mean, we're talking this could cause, health problems for people forever. So,
Okay. And
alrighty.
the next section was 3.4 geology and soils.
Okay, and that's the one where I have the map that I constantly tell everybody about, the earthquake zones of required investigation. This came out September 23rd, 2021. And for some reason, it is not included in the EIR, and no one seems to want to utilize this data, although it comes from the California government. So I'm really not sure why we don't use these. But what's significant to me is if you look at all of those green areas, these are all earthquake liquefaction zones. Also notice that they cross Highway 1 up at Devil's Slide and again south in Moss Beach. So, and in addition, you see Sunshine Valley Road as well as 16th Street are all within these liquefaction zones. So that is really significant and greatly would affect any kind of exit from the area. If there's an earthquake and roads are failing, that could also affect anyone trying to evacuate the area. So I think yeah, that's all I had in that.
You also showed this map, interesting.
Oh, yeah, that was the key. I wanted to show the legend mainly. That's kind of like, but that also shows more liquefaction, but I wanted to show the key
Okay,
to what things mean.
okay. Your next section, oh, you had more to say here, but I think you just spoke to it.
Yeah. I think I covered that.
No formal evacuation plan is in place for development or on the coast?
Nope.
How do we know that?
As far as I know, from what I have been told, there is none other than Zone Haven. That's all I know about. I don't know if anyone else knows anything about that. You can let me know, but I don't know of any that is present or available. There's nowhere that I could find any evacuation plan in writing.
Okay.
So that's my assumption as well. And no one has told me of one. And
All
I've
right.
asked.
I would suggest that's a prerequisite to this project. I don't know what the rest of the council thinks. I mean,
Excuse me, but this is Dolores. Actually, they do say in this plan that in the DEIR, and I can send it to you, but that the county has no evacuation plan. Actually, they don't have any
That's where
evacuation plans.
That's where I read it. Okay, thanks,
Yes.
Dolores. All right, your
Correct.
next section, I think this is your last one, is 3.3 biological resources. Yeah, that's your last section here, Ann. I just scrolled down. Do you want me to show some of these pictures, or you want me to start with the text?
Yeah, you want to just show the picture and I'll read the text above it. You can start
Okay.
with the first there. And so I could just kind of give you an overview. That is the Moss Beach post office on the left, and to the right is an area, the whole entire length of that I identified the red-legged frog habitat. I have informed the previous Board of Supervisors. I have video, and according to the Center for, as I mentioned here, Biological Diversity, critical habitat includes specific areas within a species' current range that have physical or biological features essential for the conservation of the species. Critical habitat must include all areas deemed important to a species' survival or recovery, whether the species currently resides in those areas, historically resided in those areas, uses those areas for movement, or needs them for any reason. The EIR provides some protections for endangered plants and animals, however, incorrectly identified the location of the red-legged frogs. You can also see Joe Leclerc. I sent you a video. Yeah, and that picture more specifically shows their habitat. And he also discussed this with the MCC that in fact the red-legged frog is located in this and other areas in the Moss Beach corridor. So that does need to be addressed. And I did mention, they've lost 90% of their habitat. And their entire population, the red-legged frog population has declined by 90%. So, we're about to call them extinct pretty soon, and that's not acceptable. And then I also hear the red-legged frog can make excursions up to 1 mile through upland habitats in wet weather and can disperse up to 2 miles from breeding ponds, which you would assume Montara Pond is Montara
Creek.
Or it's a creek, thank you very much, is also part of this habitat. So if they're making their way to breed down here, they're crossing not only the road, but most likely the construction site. And I'm saying that an endangered species biologist should survey the entire site prior to, during, and after construction to ensure the safety of the frogs, as well as endangered plant species. And then they said that they had an hour of biological training for their engineers to look over the site and put up any fencing if necessary. And I said, that is not acceptable. also the breeding period is between November to April, so that's a pretty big period of time that these
Just-
frogs would be in movement.
Just as a side note, could you get Jill Grant or her husband, who are biologists, to comment on how much training is required and to back up what we're saying here so that we have some other expertise bearing on it rather than our own research?
Sure. And if you don't mind giving me her information, I'd be more
I
than
will. Yeah, I'll do that.
I'll be happy to get those statements. And so that's what I had for those sections there.
Okay. So I think at this point, we've now heard from Dan and myself and Ann, and I'd go around and ask council members what other bullet points they'd want to register or disagree with for inclusion in a report. Let me just make this framing comment, just in terms of an order of magnitude. This isn't going to be a one-page letter, but I doubt it's going to be 100 pages. But I think it's going to be 10, 20. It's going to be pretty long. And so it's going to require, I think, multiple authors and some coordination and some interim publication and review before we bring it back to the council. I believe we have to bring it back on September 13th, unless we call a special meeting for September 20th, because we have to hit a September 25th date. So that just is sort of process comment. Those are my thoughts. So if we go around, Gus, bullet points that you want to see added, subtracted, what do you want to contribute here? What did you review? I can't remember what you were assigned.
I have to admit, I did not get my homework done. I mean, I would not strike any of the things that are here really, except maybe I didn't know about the, like, if we're making an argument about the Moonridge ratio of parking to number of units, just to be careful about the number of units over there.
So you were supposed to review hazards and land use and transportation. Okay.
But I can do that before a drafting group. If you put me on the drafting group.
Okay.
But
Any,
other than that, I thought it was, it's a reasonable set of point. Again, you know, I think the big picture of this is they're gonna do this project, whether we register complaints or not. But I think the complaints are all valid.
could you review soon? How
Yes.
soon? 3.6, 3.8, and okay,
Saturday, I can do that.
and send me your thoughts.
Yes.
Okay, Claire, you were going to comment on chapters 4 and 5.
Yeah, before I get to that
Go ahead.
part, things that I'm concerned about that people haven't mentioned include the hazards. I have never been terribly alarmed about the asbestos and other lead and the other things that people have raised alarms about, but I'm surprised that they're not being raised now, because that has been an ongoing concern. So maybe we leave that out, but
No, I think Gus will do the hazard section and it'll probably come up.
yeah. My biggest concern is traffic. We can, according to Lisa Ketchum, recommend, or somebody can recommend, that they have more parking than what they propose. They can have like infinite amounts of parking if they choose to. They probably won't, but they're not limited in a maximum number of parking spaces, only a minimum. So that could be addressed. The two things that concern me about traffic are, and then I guess maybe Gus will look at this too, but are the fact that it completely upsets transportation throughout the entire town of Moss Beach, with things being made one way, with overly burdened very small streets, which will be modified in some way that people who live there don't like. That it's going to paralyze a lot of the transportation on the east side of Moss Beach, just people getting from one place to another. The fire department being there concerns me a great deal. I think it's going to be, I would think, have a lot of trouble being effective in the location that it's in, which I know they've already decided to do, because of the demands on the highways and the side roads. And mostly, going to sections 4 and 5, they continue to say that it is unavoidable that people will come in and out of this project onto a blind curve on a highway, and that there's nothing you can do about it. That to me is unacceptable. You can't control it with lights or intersection controls. It's such a blind curve that there's really nothing you can do. And they say that, and they say, but we should do it anyway. I don't think they should do it anyway. I think they should find some kind of way to make it safe or not do it. There are the other options they recommend or they suggest considering, and basically what they're looking at is places that have been zoned as PUDs that could be used for affordable housing. It seems to me that the land in El Granada, which is currently owned by the school board, might be a reasonable candidate, although it certainly has problems. I think the biggest reason that they're not considering other sites is that they've already done all this work on this site, and they pretty much say so. But this site has always been thought to be inappropriate, and I think it remains inappropriate in this case because of traffic issues. So I don't know why the school board is not interested in selling that property in El Granada. It seems like they need the money. It also has been recently posted, according to Nextdoor, to keep people out of it. So I'm not sure if there's something going on that they're trying to protect it or what, but that does seem like an alternative site, which would work better for traffic.
Is that it for you?
That's it.
Kimberly?
I actually did my homework. I read the portions I was supposed to read and a lot more, but I did not get to the point where I had enough time to draft my bullet points. But I think I was responsible for air quality.
And greenhouse gas.
Right. So, I mean, the air quality is what you would expect. I think it was pretty standard. They attempted to adhere to basically all of the regulations and guidelines from multiple agents, government, state and local government agencies. And for the most part, I think the impacts are considered less than significant for all the factors that they modeled for. The one thing that all of you have mentioned is the traffic, and two things stuck out at me. I don't think it bears repeating the traffic impacts that you've already mentioned in terms of air quality, because that just, obviously there's more emissions related to vehicles on the road. However, the one thing that I think is a flashpoint is that the 18 months that the project is underway, there are significant diesel emissions that would impact the neighborhood or the neighbors who are the closest to the site. And they did calculate this, and they came to the conclusion that the impact was significant for the small particle PM2.5 size emissions and the diesel particulates. However, they felt that they had done the best that they could to mitigate that, and I'm not sure that's entirely true, but I don't know enough on that subject to be able to comment on what else they could do to mitigate that factor. But that was the thing in that area that stuck out to me that probably needs to be looked at more carefully. Let's see, what else? I mean, honestly, I think there's a lot of good things about this project. We kind of focused on the bad things. There are a lot of good things about this project. They've attempted to meet a lot of criteria that I haven't seen any other project try to meet in a long time. And they've sort of gone way above and beyond to try and meet those needs. That said, there are these problems we've raised, and I agree with Claire that, if they can work to solve those problems, then I'm in favor of that, because there are no other projects with this many affordable units on the coast side that I know of that we have, and it is a severe need. In regard to the greenhouse gas section of the project, there was one thing that stuck. Well, I had questions about several of the calculations, and so I'm not sure that the person writing that was as knowledgeable as they should have been about what their consultants produced. For example, they're going to remove 295 trees on the property. All of those are conifers. They're not eucalyptus. And they do not calculate the greenhouse gas emissions that, or the impact that removing 295 mature trees will have. They say that they'll offset that by planting a certain number of new trees. However, when you remove mature trees and you plant new trees, there's a long timeline before those new trees can be mature enough to sequester enough carbon that the original trees would sequester. So you're losing a huge amount of carbon storage. So that actually is a big deal. Other than that, I think, they've done their best to adhere to all the relevant regulations in regard to greenhouse gas emissions. And again, the impacts of traffic are a red flag. So that was my thoughts on those things. And I did want to say a couple things about design. Oh, and by the way, I also had concerns about the irrigation on the property. Because there are multiple references to, water saving, and they mention native vegetation, but then there are several instances where they say native vegetation or other. I don't know what the other is, and also that they're looking for drought tolerant landscaping, but then if you're looking for drought tolerant, or if you're using drought tolerant landscaping, why do you need the irrigation? So that to me was a strange thing. The other thing in the design was synthetic turf, which I think at this council, or maybe at the Hadley Bay City Council, there were presentations on the problems with synthetic turf. They actually do plan to use synthetic turf in somewhere on this property for, I don't know if it's a child's playground or some public outdoor space. So that's something I would discourage. And then there's no rain capture. I mean, this is one failing that I noted in this project and many others, and I don't know the relationship between county requirements, but rain barrels and rain capture from hard services is not utilized in this as much as it could be. So those are the things that occur to me. Again, there's a lot of great things in this project, and if we could solve these, I would support it. The last thing I'll say is that our comments are on the EIR, not the project at large, and that is a different kind of comment. And so if we are asking for changes to be implemented for this project, I'm not sure that we can mention them in our comments on the EIR, but I'm not sure that that's actually the appropriate place to ask for changes from the developer. And so maybe some clarification on what further action we need to take in conjunction with this to ask for the design or other changes.
I think that's a great comment. Claire, you have the most expertise working with planning. Do I fire off an email to Mike Schaller asking what other aspects of comment submission we're going to be granted, or?
No. I think what Kimberly said was exactly right. That right now we're commenting on this EIR.
But when do we get the chance to comment on the others, and how do we want to prepare for that is my question. How do we find that out?
Well, we've been commenting all along on that. When it goes to the planning commission, I guess.
And I think it also.
Does anybody have a problem with me asking?
It's already been decided.
Yeah, I don't think you need to.
I missed.
It may go back again, but it's better.
I can talk to you more after.
Maybe we could ask Lisa Ketchum. Would she know? Would she be able to comment on
Sure,
that?
she could talk.
All right. Okay, so my request to the council before we go to public comment is that those people who haven't submitted bullet points, hand me some bullet points. And we'll talk about the time frame. But we have a period of weeks before our next meeting. And I don't think we can wait. I think it would be great, since you've already done the thinking, if you can just dash off a few bullet point lines and we can come up with an outline, and I'll be happy to pull the first draft together. Let's entertain public comment then, and then find out what else we're going to learn. Now, Anne, before we get to public comment, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. Really, I appreciate the work that she put into this too, but I just wanted to point out to her that there are many insurmountable obstacles with this project as it is proposed. If the community at large has been against putting this type of project here for all the reasons presented before, and I know that people would like to see affordable housing on the coast, and the El Granada site is much better because that's where all the jobs are. And so, but that was never even looked at. And I asked them to look at that a long time ago. I also suggested senior housing in this location to significantly reduce the traffic requirements, and that was dismissed. So I don't really know why, but they have failed to address things over and over as we have asked them to address. And I think it's because they can't. And in particular, I think the traffic situation and the impedance of the fire department is of such significance, it must really be looked at closely. And if they cannot come up with a plan, then I think that's something that we really do need to be firm about, because this is people's lives are at risk if the fire company cannot get to them.
Okay.
So I just make that point. Thank
All right.
you.
Do we have public comment? I know we have people in the audience who have worked on research this project for years. Do you have things you want us to address that we have not, or things you disagree with in what we've presented? Dolores Silva.
Oh, question is like, where do we start? I mean, we've gone through this many times. You should look at your old comment letters, I would ask, because you've done this various times, and you'll see that a lot of the work has been done to quite an extent. But I guess what troubles me hearing these comments is that when you look at the proposal here is to build this complex before we even know what the potential remedies are feasible on Highway 1. I mean, if you're going to put 71 families here and there's going to be children, where are those children going to go? I mean, they have a tiny little playground with synthetic turf and a tiny little barbecue area with synthetic turf. And they describe that, yes, there have been high levels of lead found on this property, and they're not going to take any soil out, but they're going to bring a lot of soil in, and they're going to mix it around, probably only where they build this property. And they're going to have all these impervious soils, and they're not having any outdoor areas like for people to just socialize. They have these tiny little synthetic areas where children can play so that there'll be minimal exposure. But they're not doing anything about this high level of lead or any other hazards on the open space. Now, that doesn't seem like social justice to me. And then this is a beautiful piece of property, and they haven't even tried to take advantage of the of making it a nice place for these people. I mean, the design is really more of a cheap design that's going to limit their exposure to hazards and stuff. And that's just one aspect. Okay. The traffic, it's a huge, they originally identified, I think, 4 significant and unsolvable problems on Highway 1. They knew that from the day one. They still go after it. And they still say they can't solve it. And maybe this study that Chandra was talking about will come to the rescue, but there's no assurance that that's going to happen. So in the meantime, they're going to close Carlos Road going north. And they suggest it's at least till 2030, but it could be forever because we don't know if that's ever going to be anything. And they're going to put sharrows on Carlos Street because we don't have a bike path. And they're going to drive all this traffic down Carlos Street. I have no idea how people on Carlos Street are going to get out of their driveways. And a lot of us here on this road are in that senior plus category. And then the rest of the streets are going to have problems because as much as Ann said, the traffic is going to go to the other streets, and you're going to have even more congestion coming onto Highway 1, which is already at a very worrisome level. I mean, people can't get out, can't get onto the highway. Well, now it's going to be that much worse. So this eastern section of Moss Beach is going to be really in a stressed traffic situation. They also talk eventually about making Carlos Street one way. Again, all of these things are kind of lopsided because this project doesn't really fit here. And I certainly empathize with the idea that we need more affordable housing, not just for seniors, not just for farm workers, not just for anybody that is in this situation, but you're making it difficult for them. There's a lot of things that are, I mean, this project is getting forced here. Now, you talked about the stormwater coming down towards Carlos Street. I've never seen it. Of course, we see it every time there's a storm. You can see it streaming down what used to be 16th Street. And you can see it, I mean, it comes over where my property is, it comes over the wall there too. So this is going to get worse. There is no stormwater trench in front of my house. And I don't know about those, those bioretention ponds. That really concerns me because I'm kind of at the mercy of those things. And the noise, imagine what it's going to be like for the people who live on Sierra and Lincoln and Carlos. All those trucks are going to come up Carlos because they won't be able to make a turn on off of Highway 1 and Carlos. They're going to come through the so-called downtown area of Moss Beach. I mean, we're going to be in kind of an unlivable situation for at least 18 months. How are they going to mitigate that? How are they going to mitigate the noise that we're going to have to contend with? They have presented everything in a way that is advantageous to the project as opposed to the public safety of the people that are going to live there or the people that are already living here. I think that's irresponsible. And I think that the county isn't showing an interest in our public safety or of the new residents. How are these kids going to cross the street? How are people going to get to the bus stop? Nobody's going to go all the way to Etheldorf. They're going to go across the highway because it's, maybe a 3-minute walk instead of a 15-minute walk. A lot of this is really kind of preposterous that they propose as mitigations, like, giving them literature to discourage using their cars. I don't think that's going to work. Think about the kinds of jobs that these people are going to. bus service will never work for them. Then, as you pointed out, the emergency, what do you call it, exit or access? That's in like the worst place that you could choose for this project, because as you said, Greg, I mean, getting there is a circuitous experiment, really. Nobody goes that way.
So
So,
Doris, we have
Lots of
to,
stuff.
we have to
I'm-
give time for other people, but
I understand, and I'm ready to stop. I
I
have so
invite
many
you-
more things.
I invite you to email us bullet points as well as the supporting documents that I know you have prepared, and I've received some of them over the years. Send us what you can, and we'll factor that into the draft we prepare. And of course, it'll be publicly available. Okay, so Fran Pollard, you're next.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think the whole thing has to be fought completely. There's no place for that in between Montera and Moss Beach. That has to be fought like we fought I'm in El Granada, and we took on something similar on Marauder Surf East and West. They were going to put originally 150 units in that little space. That's the open space next to El Granada School and on the west side of the highway where the coastal trail is. Can you imagine that now? That's another community within the community. And that's what these outside developers want to do in your community now. Put another community within your community where there's no water, no sewer, no roads capacity, no nothing. And they're forcing all this on our unincorporated area. And Anne, I'm really surprised at you saying that let's put it in El Granada. Why are you pitting our community against yours? There's no, and what are you talking about? Jobs in El Granada? There's no jobs here. We're 3 times the density of Moss Beach and Montera. And there's no way to escape now. That's what we've been worried about. How do we get out of here now? You can't afford that tripling of traffic. So you've just got to take it on. They went, so let's see, the developers on Marauder Surf then decided, okay, we'll do half the density. So they went from 150 to 75, 35 on the west side, 35 on the east side. That's only 70, but I don't know, maybe it was 70 units until we finally got rid of it altogether. And now we can't even play over there. As you notice, it's always vacant because it's such precious land over there. And that's where you should have your only open space. I worked on the community plan many years ago, which became the local coastal plan, the LCP, and I think we all should start fighting for that again. We have already developed it called for infilling of the subdivided lands that already existed at the time, which you have in Montera and Moss Beach. And the space in between is designated as open space for park. That's what you need, a big parkland and your community center there in between the two communities. It's a perfect space. And that's the way it should be. Half Moon Bay is the place to grow on the coast. They're the bigger city. They want growth. They are preparing for growth, and they are preparing for low income housing. And we should consider that as a whole coastside unit. Not every little community now has to double in size. That's ridiculous. So that's my say. Just fight the whole thing.
Okay, Fran, if you would, you can email me your suggestions on how you've defeated Westinghouse and made this work, because I know you did, but I could use some tips. I don't see any other hands raised from the community. Michael, are you trying to raise your hand? Okay, so you have to unmute yourself. Michael Prieto.
Oh, I see it.
Okay.
Thank you for telling me how to do that. Yeah, I live in Moss Beach up in on Buena Vista Street. And I've been active with a lot of this stuff, resist density and things like that, for probably the last 15, 20 years. Looking at the current report, there are several things that I would take umbrance to. Many of those are situations where they're saying, well, we don't really care that there's a problem. We know it's there and we'll try to deal with it later. But I do know that living on Buena Vista Street, when they talk about water or runoff, from where I live, which is at Pearl and Buena Vista, that's the crest of the hill. Our runoff goes right straight to that area for the Cypress Point. And, just that distance, about a quarter of a mile, it rips up that road at the other end as it goes through Cypress. It goes past the 2 water towers, and it congregates right there in the old heliport. It's really very difficult. I mean, those streets, our streets were never put in by the county. They're not, very strong. They're not sturdy. So are they going to be still talking about routing trucks or delivery trucks and everything through Buena Vista Street? So I just think that it's just like the others have said, I think it's very ill planned. It's a project that's not really good for the area.
Where was the pooling again, Mike?
The pooling occurs right in front. You'll see rivulets and stuff like that are cut right through the road in front of the 2 water towers. And also it's to the right of where the pipes are for the water come out of the towers and into the system.
Okay, so the pooling occurs on the top of the land on the east side of the project.
Correct. And that little area turns into a swamp.
Okay, thanks. I don't know that they've taken into account existing drainage pooling on their property. I'll look
And
into that.
somewhat the same thing happens on Sierra Street. The water comes, because when we put everything in, we just have water runoff ditches. So the rain comes off the houses and everything comes out, and they rush downhill. And when you get down just past where the fire department is, the water flows across and, endangers some of those houses right there at the other end where Ethelbert and Carlos and those guys are at.
Are you aware of any stormwater runoff from the project site that goes to the south as opposed to the north, goes south towards Sierra and Stetson and Carlos? They're claiming the runoff will go north to the creek.
Well, no, but actually right now there is, because the runoff from the top of the hill on Buena Vista Street takes a easterly turn. But it's generally sinks into the ground before it gets to that little creek.
Ah. Okay. Thanks.
As a matter of fact, there's a little street that's just past the water tower, cuts across the property line or that area, and it will get as much as 2 or 3 feet of standing water in the low areas.
Would you mind sharing an email with me? I'd like to come see some of this.
Sure.
Type it in the chat or send it to the MCC.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Do we have any other public comment? Hearing none, seeing none. I close public comment. So discussion among the council on next steps. What the best I can propose is to come up with a draft by, let's see, what's the calendar say? I get your comments, all your comments. Let's suppose I got them all by midnight Sunday.
Midnight this Sunday,
Pardon?
this Sunday coming up,
Yeah, is that possible?
my best.
Then I could have a draft put together. Certainly by Friday the 1st, and I would even welcome some co-authors, depending upon who wants to put in the time to do that. Gus is volunteering. Ann, are you volunteering? I don't see, she's volunteering, okay. So,
I can offer edits. once
yeah,
it's
and we've discussed the overload you already face and the number of agenda items you're handling, but you always will have the opportunity to edit. Okay, so I will work with Gus and Ann as I put this thing together. And I will try and produce a draft. Did I say Friday, the 1st of September? If I do that, we can't discuss it as a group without calling a meeting. So that means either we have to wait until the 13th, discuss it, and it probably will take some extensive hashing, and then call a special meeting on September 20th. Or we have to call a special meeting on whatever it is, the 6th of September, and have our first thrashing out there and then finish it on the 13th. That would be my preference, but I don't know what your schedules are. Potential special meeting on the 6th. Any objections?
Let me just
equally
check.
undesirable.
Equally undesirable, okay.
Board meeting.
You have a board meeting on the 6th. So could you do the 20th?
Yes.
Okay, so Gus could do a special meeting on the 20th, which means that we will prepare it and hand it out for individual comments in advance of the 13th, like 10 days in advance of the 13th, okay? And then we will review it in session and tweak it and finalize it on the 20th at a meeting dedicated just to the Cypress Point EIR. Okay, is that no objections?
What about some of the other things that we have going on?
The normal regular sessions? You mean the other agenda topics,
The other things that we've been asked to comment on,
like the
Like-
hotel?
like the hotel, like the Quarry Park, et cetera.
Well, the Quarry Park, I thought we were going to comment on the 27th. I got to get back to the spreadsheet that Kimberly put together. I don't keep it all in my head, but we got an extension essentially from Parks to comment on that. And I'll double check on that. Have you talked to Nick recently about that?
Yeah, I just did. And yeah, he said they were gonna push it back so we could talk about it on the 27th
Okay.
of September. Yes, okay.
And then as far as the hotel goes, well, I think we have to have our agenda planning meeting, and this is where I've written you and Kimberly, because Kimberly is interested in being actively involved in this. The three of us have to set a time up in the coming days. And Claire, I think you have an email on this, and you can get back to us, because I know your schedules.
I didn't see it, okay.
Did I not send it out? Well, let's put it this way. If I haven't hit send or whatever, I'm going to forward, I think, what Kimberly sent me as availability. And I'm going to ask what you can do, and then I'll contact you both to schedule an agenda planning session. Okay. And so that will tell us what we're going to cover on the 13th, in addition to covering some of Cypress Point. So Cypress Point is one major agenda topic on the 13th, but we could have another, and I just can't remember what it is.
I see that Dolores put in the chat that she thinks Mid-Pit is having a meeting on the 14th at Mueller's office.
Yeah, I heard something like that. But I don't know, I don't remember it in writing.
Is that something we need to prepare to comment that?
Let me get more information. That could be part of the agenda item we discuss on the 13th, is how much of what we're working on we go and discuss.
Also, I was going to say the planning department is going to have a public meeting on the morning of the 13th in the Board of Supervisors chambers.
That's right. That I have on the schedule.
So,
Planning review,
yeah.
Cypress Point, San Mateo Planning Commission on Wednesday, September 13th at 9 a.m.
So do you want to have any kind of comments or preliminary comments for that meeting?
I don't know that we could do it without holding a special meeting. We're still going to reply in time on the EIR. We all individually can go. I would kind of like to hear what everybody else has to say at that meeting. It might inform what we do that night in terms of altering our report, potentially. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Okay, well, we'll leave it that way. We're not going to schedule an extra set of deliverables.
I mean,
But I know I will attend that meeting on the 13th at the planning department.
oh, okay.
Um,
I would just think that that's a really important meeting.
Yeah. Okay, am I missing anything here about Cypress Point? I think we closed this agenda item. I think our action items are straight. And we move on to council member activity. I do have some things, but let's go around first. Dan, you want to say anything? No. Ann?
No.
Kimberly?
Yes, there is one thing I'd like to say. The Coastal Commission meeting is, I think it's the second week in September. And sorry, I'm just looking at it here. On Wednesday, September 6th, there is an item that might be of interest to us, and that is the application for the Surfers Beach Sand Restoration Project at Pillar Point Harbor. It will be considered, it's item 15A on the agenda for that day.
That we wonder if we should weigh in on that at all, or just watch it. What do you think?
I think it's a good idea to weigh in if we have specific things that we're concerned about related to that. If we have no concerns, then maybe there's not a reason to weigh in.
We've been hoping it would happen. At least I think we have officially been hoping it would happen for a long time.
So it might be important to, maybe we show up as individuals, or we show up as a council representative to provide support.
Or we could write something.
When will we have to write it by?
Comments are due by 5 p.m. I think on Monday.
Which Monday?
The 4th. Hold on.
The 4th of Monday?
So the meeting is Wednesday, September 6th, and the public comment would be due by 5 p.m. The day before.
And we don't have a meeting before that.
No, we do not have a meeting for that. And as Gus points out, it's September 4th on Labor Day.
That's Labor Day.
And you do have to submit a speaker request for those meetings.
I don't see how we could do it as a council, as a group. Without a special meeting. Do you think it's worth a special meeting?
You mean to draft a comment?
Yeah,
Do we have an existing letter in the can somewhere that we could send them? I don't know.
That's a good.
Look back, I think there have been some.
Kimberly, are you willing to own this issue? You could check with Ms. Ketchum, for instance, or not?
Sure, and I mean, I might have time to dash off a letter, but we need to meet and approve it.
I'm not seeing a lot of enthusiasm for a special meeting. I'm happy to have you write a letter individually.
There will be enthusiasm. I feel like, we're gonna get some traction. Okay.
All right, well, so if she drafts the letter and circulates it to us, then we poll ourselves and decide whether we want to have a special meeting. Is that what I'm hearing?
Could we have a special meeting on Zoom that took 5 minutes?
We have to publicly notice it. We have to take minutes. We have to go through the whole thing. I don't know about Zoom.
So it could still be just a 30-minute meeting or, I mean, I don't think the length is a requirement, right?
No, the length's not a requirement. There would be setup and takedown time. Look, I'm happy to have you draft up a letter and circulate it to us with a request for a special meeting to approve it.
Okay, well, I do have to disclose here that I will be drafting comments on behalf of Surfrider Foundation, which express some concerns, not necessarily opposed to the project, but do express some concerns and some requests. So that might be a conflict of interest. I'm still happy to draft a letter based on what the council wants to represent the council, but the letter did not, I mean, I don't know how you want to approach that.
Mhm. I guess I need to know more about the issue. I mean, I need somebody to study it on behalf of the council and make a recommendation. I'm going to be consumed with the Cypress
I mean,
Point.
if it's a simple letter of support, that's pretty easy. It doesn't have to be too detailed. Somebody could just,
Maybe
I
you
can
get
send a
Scott.
draft to
Can you
one of
get
the-
Scott? Can you get Scott to do it? No, he won't be back until the 7th.
I could draft something and send it to one of you to finalize.
Okay. Gus just volunteered.
If you're comfortable with that.
All right. So Kimberly to draft a proposed letter of support and send it to Gus, and then we can decide whether we have a special meeting to adopt it. Okay. Other council member activity, Kimberly, were you done?
I'm done.
Claire?
I'm gonna just Google whether, I'm gonna look at their website and see if we have a letter. We could approve it right now if we did.
That's a great
Okay,
idea.
well, while you're doing that, Gus, council member activity?
Aside from talking to Nicholas, that was the only thing I.
Okay, I do want to mention a few things. I attended an event at the Coastside Democrats, I think it was called, last night with Mike Kalki and Ray Mueller. A couple of troubling things came out of that. And of course, I don't have this in writing. I don't have tape recording. And, you know, my memory is always subject to interpretation. But they were talking about the things the county does for the Midcoast. And one of the things that came out around the edges was Ray's got to start doing stuff for the cities because he's done so much for us.
What?
What?
I know. I heard the same thing. Okay,
Who
just
said
I'm Ray said that. Okay, and I think Callagy backed him up. Now, you may not be aware, there is a lot of stuff that they've been doing down in Half Moon Bay, like buying property to build affordable housing on the flower gardens. And so, I mean, he's done a bunch of stuff there. And I know Pacifica is kind of grumpy in a way because they don't feel they've gotten a lot of attention. I just wanted to put that out there. There was an issue where I think I announced to the council that the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative map changed on August 4th or something. They changed the map and took us out of it. And so we got Congresswoman Eshoo and Senator Becker and Berman to all write a letter. And Ray's had a conversation with the people at the California Department of Technology, something like that. The issue apparently, and this is what Ray was telling me and Deborah Penrose and Harvey Rohrbeck, who were there last night. It was the money, and it's too expensive to run the cable here. They can run 3 times as much cable in cheaper parts of the state. So that's why they cut us out. And
Are we talking about coming through the tunnels?
it comes through the tunnel and
Extending it?
down to Half Moon Bay. And apparently they were considering down to Pescadero because they apparently told Ray 30 miles. And so Ray said, no, we don't need that. We just need a couple of miles to take it down to Moss Beach and Montero. Okay, so the problem I have with that is that would be for Comcast. And unless we're assured that they do not own that cable, then we can put other providers on it. That would essentially enhance an oligopoly. It would solve a redundancy problem for Comcast, but it wouldn't solve the problem of the backup power, the backup batteries, the cell phone coverage, and all the other things that are in our report. So I intend to have another conversation with Ray, and I think from the reaction of Deborah and Harvey, they are also not happy that this partial accommodation is not really going to solve our problem. But the money is a real issue. And if I lived in Pescadero, I'd be even more upset because they just got cut off. Now, our pitch was the multiplicity of hazards we have, natural hazards. While we have some connectivity, we have all these other hazards, and we need the communication more than somebody in the middle of the, the valley. So I just want to make that aware of that. There's one other thing that happened I just became aware of today. Apparently, the county just approved a retaining wall on a property in Seal Cove and closed the county road. And I don't know all the details. There's a question of whether that closes off access to the beach from residents by making it part of private property. There's a question of whether or not that retaining wall is actually a good idea, given what the geologist from the USGS that Lisa Ketchum introduced me to, and I toured the site, is actually going to do any good. And then there's a question of increasing the cost of service to all of the ratepayers of Montero Water and Sanitary District, because they're going to have to cross an earthquake fault with their service lines. And we know it's going to, fracture. And that is part of an ongoing problem in Seal Cove, its settlement and so forth. So apparently Tim Fox made a ruling on behalf of Montero without talking to Montero. So I don't know where this is going to go, but we have some pockets on the Montero system that are extremely labor and cost intensive, and this is one of them. And so there's an issue of paying attention to that and not setting a precedent. Okay, that's it for my council member activity.
I don't see a letter about the sand replenishment. There are multiple presentations and the neck over 8 years, but no letters.
Okay. All right. Do we have Dan, what is the protocol again?
I'll move to adjourn.
And does anybody object? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.